Good evening, our esteemed viewers. Welcome to yet another episode of the Tower at UNN. My name is Dr. Juuko, your host and presenter. This is a program that is designed to help our viewers understand the rights as citizens of Uganda, create awareness, and interpreting the training issues which are happening in our country. I'm always privileged to have you on our platforms, and we shall be digesting some of the training issues which have occurred in Uganda and also those pertinent issues that Ugandans need to understand. Today, we are going to be indulging deeply into the political history of Uganda. And our question is, where did we go wrong? What is that political problem or political question that has not been answered ever since we obtained our independence? Our esteemed viewers, everybody is aware that Uganda got her independence in 1962. That was a time when they adopted, or our great fathers adopted, the federal system of governance as the way to go, and also feeling that it would be the best way that Uganda would go to have harmony among all its citizens. Nonetheless, in 1966, Uganda's independence was lost by when the prime minister by then, Milton Obote, overthrew the constitution and replaced it with a pigeonhole constitution, which was abolishing the kingship and the federal system of governance. All these are the issues we are going to indulge in this discussion tonight. Welcome aboard, and we hope everybody enjoys this show. I am so privileged tonight that I have very great people who know a lot of history of Uganda, and these are the ones we are going to have discussed or digest into these important issues. And with me tonight, I have Mr. Kyendo Ahamed. Can you please, you're welcome to the show, and can you please greet our viewers before I explain to our viewers who you are?
I thank you very much. And wherever you are, I greet you, I salute you. Somehow I would say good evening, but in some other areas it's not yet evening. However, I'm happy to be here for this show. I thank you.
Mr. Kyendo, Senior Kyendo. Senior Kyendo is a seasoned civil servant. He's an educationist who has been in the education sector for long. He's also a good writer and analyst. I've seen a lot of his work done. If you go to his page, he has written very many literature that is really with a lot of insight in what is really going on in Uganda. You're welcome, Mr. Kyendo. Next is I have Honorable Kenny Luchams, the man. It's a pleasure, Honorable Kenny Luchams, to have you on this show, The Tower at UNN. And actually, we also have Desire, the analyst, as usual. Desire, can you greet our viewers?
As always, it's a pleasure to be here, to be able to be amongst a panel with people so enriched in knowledge about Uganda that elapses even my time on earth. So as always, it's a pleasure, and I hope that we all can pick something from today's discussion, learn something, and push the message forward. And I'm happy to be here and to be a part of this panel today.
Thank you, Desire. Thank you very much. I think given what, before we indulge in deep in the discussion, I would like you to tell us what has been so interesting this week, what has been so trending for you this week, as we try to, give our viewers a glimpse of what has really happened in the week.
As usual, one thing that's been happening this week and something that we were looking forward to was, of course, the illegitimate president's address that happened on Saturday, is to see what he himself had to say about security in the country, and also like what are the steps that have been put in place to support and help families or Ugandans moving forward from the elapsing of the lockdown. What strategies has the country put in place as a government and as a ruling party? But as always, just more confusion seems to be trickling down. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of lack of communication and confusion coming from the ruling party. So again, Ugandans, as always, as it has been for the past few years, we find ourselves in the realization of we are living in a failed state, and it's up to us to pull ourselves out of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Desire. That's a very good insight of what really is happening. As I mentioned earlier, it's a pleasure that we have you, Honorable Kenny Lukyamuzi, the man. Can you greet our viewers before I introduce who you are? Can you hear us, Honorable Lukyamuzi?
I greet you with the honor. My name is Ken Lukyamuzi, the man. I am excited by what Uganda Olympic Games recently, and I'm happy to be talking to you because they be talking about.
Yes, we seem to be having some technical problem down there with Honorable Kenny Lukyamuzi, and I hope our technical team is gonna do the best to make sure that we get the best out. Can you hear us now? Yes, I think we have lost him for now, and we're gonna get him later on as we try, to develop our stories. Let me have Senior Kyendo. It has been a long week, and you know how things move around in Uganda so fast. And would you please try to give us a view of what made you what was so interesting for you, and what was the bad side of Ugandan training issues?
Thank you, Dr. Juuko. There is an issue, maybe pulling it away too much, because it was, I think, around the August, is it 6th August, where Uganda retired some officers. What intrigued me is actually what is interesting also, that at that time, the UPDF was retiring resistance officers, RO officers. Not UPDF officers, but RO officers. Now, I was wondering, we have had an army of UPDF, but the officers being retired are carrying numbers as RO, meaning they never moved away from the National Resistance Army to the UPDF generation, and yet it's now the UPDF retiring NRA. That was quite interesting. But also to come a little nearer, just yesterday, the 14th, the president of Uganda addressed the nation. And his address was really interesting. Here is the president who was actually choosing his security for mishandling Ugandans, for backing at Ugandans, for beating Ugandans, for mistreating Ugandans. Indeed, it looked like he was away from Uganda, and that was quite interesting. These were features of the newspapers all along throughout the elections, where we have had people being held incommunicado, and now the president says, how do you keep them in the jail? You see, it was very interesting.
Yeah, I think that sounded an irony of because it's very ironical for the president, who is the commander in chief as well, and he's asking why the army and the police are keeping people in custody without trial. That was very, very interesting and actually intriguing as well. So let's start direct from you, Mr. Kyendo. We have had a very interesting history of Uganda. Uganda, as I've mentioned, became a British protectorate in 1896, if not 94, 96. And ever since then, or prior to that, the 1996, that's when Buganda became a British protectorate. And when we come nearer, 1900 agreement was trying to incorporate other states that existed besides Uganda to bring them together. And by 1936, there was a completion of the establishment of Uganda as a country. Nonetheless, one should understand that prior to that, all these states were independent nations, especially the Six Nations. And here we're looking at a situation whereby after 1962, when Uganda got independence, and when we remember that situation, we had the Lancaster meeting, which established the system of governance that was pertinent to the situation that we had in Uganda by then. And they chose to have a federal system of governance. Therefore, it became very paramount that Ugandans were coming as nations into the formation of Uganda as a country. However, in 1966, there was another disarray that was brought in by Milton Obote when he overthrew the constitution of Uganda. So I want you to indulge a little bit into the discussion that the Ugandan political question has not been answered ever since we had independence. Because initially, as I've mentioned, there was a lot that was expected by societies that were operating within the bigger society. Mr. Kyendo, what is your take about such a situation? Can you please indulge a little bit in the historical element of Uganda and how did it come to be what it was?
I thank you, Dr. Juuko. But it is quite interesting that the Ugandan history was written with a lot of lies at that time of 1962, as you have said. Lies in the sense that there are very many issues which were not actually, which were not solved, but looked as if they were solved. You have actually, I should say, wrongly said that Uganda got a federal constitution. Surely the federal constitution, it's actually lies, I should say, because there was a federal system in Uganda, half federal in some other kingdoms. It's only Buganda which actually had the federal. The others were unitary. So these people were only giving Buganda, they were like you have, what we call it? It is a sweet coating over something very bitter. So these people wanted Buganda to come together with the rest of other states to make Uganda. So the biggest problem came around that time when they were making a Uganda through a constitution. The question is, whose constitution was it? Was it a constitution for Ugandans? Was it a constitution for a group of people? I want to think it wasn't a constitution for all Ugandans. It was a constitution for people who wanted to share up some few things, because when you look at that constitution, Buganda had questions which had not been solved. For instance, the Buganga counties, which had been taken away from Bunyoro, those were not solved, but given as if they were part of Buganda. But within the constitution, these people are supposed to go and again have a referendum. Now, that was something which was not solved, and yet it was assumed that we were together. So that's one of the problems. There were lies. Secondly, I'm looking at the actors up to that level of 1966. Actually, the biggest part of the actors were the whites, the colonialists. Actually, the UK, which was giving us independence, they were actually giving us independence, but with a lot of lies. Can you imagine? They'll tell you, Buganda got independence. Buganda got independence on the 8th October. And yet the following day, it is the independence for the whole of Uganda. Now, what was this independence they're talking of, that Buganda got independence on the 8th? Lies, I want to say. So our biggest problem has been lies. People are not talking the right thing, because as a matter of fact, Britain knew if Buganda was not coerced into the union called Uganda, Buganda would never have accepted that independence. But they made a situation that they even promised the king, the Sava Sajja, that you will be the head of state. True, he was made the head of state, but with no powers at all. That's where, again, another problem came in. Lies. Here is a head of state who had no authority. So in one way or the other, that's where the problem came in. The king, who was the head of state, thought he had powers. Indeed, as when you read, you'll find that the president at that time was mobilizing forces by that time of the 1966. And yet they'll tell you he had no powers. That's where the problem also is. Secondly, or next to that, there are these people who were very, very, I don't know what I should call, because this man called Obote Milton was a wise man, I should say, because he knew what he wanted. But
he was cunning. I think that the best word would be cunning.
Cunning. He's a man who knew that to get this, you had to do this. Stories are abound how he was taken up to Bamunanika and he literally knelt before the king of Buganda, so that they can actually come up with their alliance. But he was never for the alliance. It was about lying to this gullible king who thought he would be the president and would have all the powers and all that. You can imagine that the king, Kabaka of Uganda, would not ally with his fellow Muganda, Beni Kiwanuka. At the end of the day, the lies left a very big problem. So that's one of the other problems. Another problem was also about the army. You know, the institution of the army by that time of 1966. Can you imagine that the president, so the prime minister, could abrogate a constitution at will using the army, as if the army was his institution? That's now the problem. Because the army was never institutionalized, it became a problem. It was a question which has continued even up to today as we move on. The army, that institution from 1966, that is a question which we have had. Lastly, for now, maybe, there was also lack of cohesion at that time. Can you imagine when the constitution was abrogated, the kingdoms banned? It was like it was a Buganda affair. The rest of the country did not feel it. Whereas, well, these Bunyoro, Ankole, Soga lost their power as kingdoms. But it looked like it was a Buganda affair. So there has always been a lack of cohesion within the structure of Uganda. Yeah, that has been one of our problems, and it is actually seen at around 1966.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kyendo, for the insight and actually very interesting history. And when you look at such all the problems of lies and intrigue and hypocrisy, they all have to surface. And you know, when such a thing happens, it goes on haunting the whole system up to now. I think as we go on advancing, we shall see that all that you've mentioned, those are the political questions that have still gone on, recurringly, and they have ended up haunting the whole system up to now. Let me bring in Desire. Desire, when we look at the situation that Mr. Kyendo or Senior Kyendo has mentioned, it is something to do with the lies that were, that surfaced at a time when we got independence. And these are the very things that are really haunting Uganda. They have gone to surface at whatever time that we try to change government. Would you please indulge a bit in the discussion that Mr. Kyendo has started and see how best we can get sense out of it?
So definitely this idea of lies and fabricated stories to make up our history have been told throughout and are used as a tool to make sure that us as a population never come to a place whereby we can demonstrate self-determination and sovereignty that we are told that we have. For example, I'll give an example of the Uganda education system and what we're told and how we were told about our history, and how even during this age and era, there's things that I'm still learning about Ugandan history, and there are things that I'm still learning about how Uganda was formed and how it was fomented. So if you have a population that is not educated on its own history, that's why we have history repeating itself from an Obote regime to a Museveni regime, which is clear-cut copy and paste. So the notion of lies and misinformation work very well for people who for regimes that want to use this as a political tool to rule the masses and govern the masses. They actually start to weaponize the misinformation and the lies that are not only put in our present, but are also planted in our past. Because once those lies have been put in our past and we don't come to a realization of what our history actually is, then it's easy to use those lies to create a manifested future. And this is something that Museveni is good at. Because Museveni, one thing that he learned was that the trajectory of history, at least on an economic scale, it can be predicted how historically, economically we're going to advance. What he decided to do was to redirect that. So we're dealing with a person who actually knows the history and uses it against the people who are misinformed and uninformed. And the best way to do it is by implanting lies. And let us not think that Museveni does this alone. This is within some partnerships and strong partnerships. And this starts, the first fundamental partnership is with our colonial masters, our former colonial masters, is the lies that the British have told to the Ugandan masses. The idea of independence and having got independence is not true. That's rather a big lie, because we are still living in an era whereby we are just now a colony without the masters on the colony. So at the end of the day, on this idea of lies, I want to start with the number one thing that I want to start and iron out is the idea that we got independence from the British. The question to all Ugandans, did we actually get independence from the British? And answering that would be, we're now living in small colonies, but that don't have the British ruling directly, but we have puppet leaders such as Museveni taking care of their business for them at home. That's one of the lies. We've talked about the military and the lack of institutionalization of the military. What would a military look like for the people? We haven't even come to an idea of that could look like. So this idea of lies especially as planted in history, becomes very important if we want to plan for a future.
Thank you very much, Desire. Thank you very much. As we try to indulge in this discussion, we would like again, let me bring in Senior Kyendo. Senior Kyendo, you talked about the importance of, the way Ugandans have been hoodwinked to think that possibly there is, Uganda got independence as Desire has mentioned, which was a wrong thing. And all the, remember all those days after the independence, it was moving on the ping pong, or I would say in the hands of the white men. They are the ones that would dictate who would come in. You remember what happened in 1962? I think it was again a way the president the president of then, that Milton Obote, tried to play around with the people by being used by the whites. And then 1970, it was again the play on when Idi Amin came to power. It was a darling to the white people or to the colonial master. Would you please try to indulge in this and give us another insight on this? But before you give us an insight, let's have a video showing what happened at Lancaster in Britain when the conference was that brought in the constitution that we talked about, 1962, the Lancaster Conference of 1961. Let's have a video from the producer.
The Conference on the Future of Uganda in East Africa resumed in London at Marlborough House, June 12, 1962. The previous conference, held at Lancaster House in the British capital in September 1961, agreed on a constitution providing that the Kingdom of Buganda should play its full part in the state of Uganda, in which it would enjoy federal status. The present conference is to make the final constitutional arrangement for Uganda's independence in October. Present at the opening were Buganda Chief Minister M. Kintu, Toro Chief Minister S. Rusoki, Ankoli Chief Minister J. W. Kazora, British Governor Sir Walter Cootes sitting next to Uganda Prime Minister Milton Obote, the leader of the Democratic Party in opposition B. K. Batarangaya, and UK Secretary of State for the Colonies, Reginald Maudling.
We will be inspired by the prospect of an independent Uganda taking her place among the nations of the world and among the nations of the Commonwealth.
It is a tribute to the British men and women who went to Uganda and transformed the country in a manner which has made it possible for us today to talk of the independence of Uganda. This is in fulfillment of the British policy of trusteeship and of social and economic development, which aims at preparing colonial peoples for independence.
Yes, I think you have had a very good glimpse of what really transpired in the Lancaster Conference of 1962. And actually, you saw how Milton Obote, the prime minister by then, was trying to, to show what the colonial masters had done to Uganda. He was like appreciating what the developments and all that. Would you please indulge in this a little bit and you see what happened?
Very much, Dr. Juuko. Indeed, when you look at that clip, you can see a host of naive young men moving, being actually hoodwinked that they are going to get independent, and they are taking independence to their land. Independence, really, one wonders whether we have been independent since then. However, I want to say this independence they are talking of has been a lie, a very big lie, because just look at what is even happening today. Here is a situation: you are independent. What is it that you do in your country which shows that you are actually independent? We are not independent. We shall take our children or our children for education in their countries. We shall get to their countries for treatment and everything of that sort. Actually, we are looking to the West, to other countries for our own development. So independence is really a marriage. Now, look at a situation about land. Land is one aspect where I've got a lot of lies through this independence. You will find when this land was being given out, when it was being actually doled, some piece of this land was actually given to the king. Some of this land was given to the state, to the crown, okay? And at the end of the day, people in Uganda were left as paupers. They didn't have any land, and then you say they are independent. A very, very big lie about independence. Now, what independence is that? Where someone does not hold a factor of production, because land is a factor of production. If any country is going to develop, land is very, very important. But even at independence, the land question was never solved. So this independence we have been moving along with. Right now, today, the government of Uganda is actually trying to tinker with the constitution about land, the land question, which was actually never solved at independence time. You remember, Buganda chiefs or men had their land in Bunyoro, but they had the titles, and the titles were in Bunyoro, and someone was telling them, you see, that is Buganda. At the end of the day, when people had to go and settle that side, the Bunyoro had to send them away. The land question was never solved. Independence, there's no independence where there's no land. It's like even when you go to South Africa, what independence is there when the whites hold the land? Okay, it's only in Zimbabwe where Mugabe tried, at least at the end, you see, he only tried it at the end to give out land to the people. So as long as land is not solved, people are never going to be independent, you see. So that's a very big problem. I wanted to also bring forward an issue of the army. I want to say, once the institutions are not grown, you can't talk of independence. In South Africa, ANC will fight as a party, but the army will always be the army. They'll never come in. In Uganda, the army was created to fit a certain person, and that person was Obote. At the end of the day, after Obote, the army had to follow Amin. After Amin, then Obote. Then afterwards, even this army we have in Uganda, it is an army of an individual. Where is that independence? When the institutions have not been grown to move, that has been a very big problem in as far as our problems are concerned. Lastly, for this time, the colonial masters have continued to play a very big part in our life. Okay, for instance, right now we're looking at COVID, and we are looking to the West to give us the vaccines. If they'll not sell us the vaccines, they'll actually decide when to give us or not to give us. Can you imagine the West have a kind of vaccine they'll not use in their land? You in the United States, there is a certain kind of vaccine you can use. You cannot use in the United States, but they'll give it to us because, well, what are we? So I should say that has been a very big problem. But there's also a question of governance. Governance has never been solved. Governance in Uganda has never been solved. And once that is also solved, we can talk of independence. So
yes, Mr. Kyendo, if you indulge a little bit deeper into the issue of governance, because governance wraps up everything that you've said. And when you look at the whole structure that was established right from independence, you would really agree with me that it was the governance structure that was established. And actually, the biggest problem or the question that should always haunt Ugandans all the time is the question of governance. The question of governance has never been answered ever since we would say we lost our independence, the second independence. I mean, we lost our independence in 1966. Would you clearly establish what you meant when you say the governance?
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, when we were somehow told we are independent, there is something which is very intriguing at this point. The economy of Uganda was virtually not under the hands of Ugandans. It was under the hands of the Indians. And the economic governance was never part of the people who were supposed to be independent. And this has continued up to today, where you'll find we don't know who mines this, we don't know who has that. At the end of the day, you will find we have not been in charge of our banks. Our economy is micromanaged from outside. Okay, that kind of governance. When you go to how we even get our own leaders, through education. Actually, when you look at education, our education was never developed to the extent that we are not people who create something. In fact, if I can give an example of China. China, their education is actually interesting. It is an education for production. Our education here in Uganda is for service, to serve, to be clerks, to be what? Was also a very big problem. For every now and then we are changing policies, we are changing what, but the management of education has been a flop in very many ways. You look at what we do, at the end of the day, we don't have anything we produce through our education. So that's what I can say for now.
Thank you very much. Actually, when we try to indulge in the issue of education, I'll bring you over at a certain time in the future so that we can go deep in the education system and how we can. Let me bring in Desire in this point of time. Desire, Senior Kyendo has been very, very categorical when he said that the question of governance has been never solved right from the time we lost our independence in 1966. Would you please indulge deeper in that?
So in regards to that topic, we're going to start with the question of what colonization was and what it is. I think we're not, the way how we're taught about colonization is something of the past and we move forward. We forget that the primary reason as to why African nations were colonized, it was because of very many reasons, but for the purpose of this discussion, I'll just state a few. One, it was economically beneficial for Europe to colonize Africa. This is because if they colonized us and they took away, because they realized that we had mineral resources on the continent, it was for economic benefit. And I think as Africans, we forget that we were colonized for economic benefit. That's why now we talk of a system whereby we have no control of our economics, our economic existence in the globe, universally. African countries are one of the places whereby we produce what we don't have and we have what we don't produce, because all the raw materials come from the African nations. So in this question of colonization, it's one, we have to understand that it was an economic strategy for Europe and Europe's allies. to colonize the African continent. And then continuing within that trajectory is number two, that colonization was violent, and colonization was a violent act that continues to spread violence down the lane. That's why now we have a government. That's why Uganda never had peace after independence. All you have is war after war and after war. The violence of colonization continues. And that's why now we are having discussions about the army and institutionalization of the army, because the idea of an army that puts violence in order to take over territory was one that came with the colonizer, and one that came with European contact with African people, in terms of having a big army for power grab, and also with the weaponry that comes with it. So this idea of genocide and killing is one also that has come with European contact with African people. That's where you have situations like the genocide that happened in northern Uganda. So right now, what is being created, and why governance becomes a big problem, is that as our senior has gone on to say, that it was naivety at first, but I would like to add on that these leaders such as Obote or Museveni are not only naive, but our greed also plays a huge role, whereby our former colonial master is able to dictate who has that greed and who has that greed for power. And this is where you see what was in that era. I would suggest what would be the people who were locally educated in colonial schools, had been exposed to radical theory in terms of independence. Then they come into power, and it's only for the sole benefit of they themselves and a few people around them. So when we have that situation continue, then you have betrayal of the masses. And then the colonial project never ends. We're living in an era where colonial violence continues to happen through institutionalized things such as the police and the military, to the extent whereby the illegitimate president can come and act aloof about what the military or police have done, even after the promise that he gave about fundamental change, and the military and police never being in a position to kill civilians. And we have witnessed in the past 2 years, or even the past 35 years of his rule, the killing of civilians through institutional arms such as the police and the military. The questions we should be asking ourselves is, why are these things continuous, and why at the point that we have seen the pattern of its continuity, but why is it that what's the word in English? Why is it that it's taken for Ugandan lives can be lost, and it will ruffle no feathers? It's just an unfortunate event that doesn't ruffle any feathers on a global scale. So the question here that I would say is, the realization we should be finding ourselves is, how then do we start to look at the question of governance, understanding that colonization brought violence, allowed for violence, and also is allowing for the continuation of this violence through proxies such as Museveni, and proxies such as the dysfunctional military and police arrangement. These are all arms that the colonial masters used for violence. Therefore, they continue to spread violence. And one of the other biggest forms of violence come through the economy and economic displacement of peoples. And that literally strips people of power. So in general, as I summarize, the question of violence is, the problem is political, but must be addressed also economically.
Okay, thank you very much, Desire. I think, Desire, you've been very, very clear when you talk about the whole structure must have failed somewhere. As you mentioned, it's really very important to note that if the governance structure is poor or it's not well established, the whole system is going to be at its worst. Let me bring in, before we go for a break, let me bring in Senior Kyendo to indulge a little bit in the issue of how did we go wrong? If the structure was not set at initial time, what do you think was the problem, and how did the player at that time not were not keen enough to see what was very important. Senior Kyendo, if you mentioned that there was a big problem at the structure initially, what do you think the players had to do to make everything? Because we saw a lot of players like Milton Obote. I saw even Bina Issa was there. And I've seen other people like Ben Chiwanuka and the rest. They were all in the system, and they never helped our system to be established the way we thought it would be. What do you think was the biggest problem by then? What really deterred them from establishing the right structure that would be pertinent up to now?
To begin with, when Uganda was being born, I don't know whether there are very many people who were willing to be Ugandans. Most people were more willing to be Baganda of Buganda, Basoga of Busoga, and Banyankole or Banyoro. So the bringing together of these people to form the that thing called Uganda was very, very important. Actually, that's where the biggest problem came in. To some people, when you put there Buganda and Uganda, and you tell them what would they pick, some would say, I don't know anything about Uganda, I'm more interested in Buganda. So the biggest problem there around that time was the failure as we were constituting Uganda. You see, much as people said they fought for independence, I don't know which fight they did, but the fight for the Ugandan independence did not make these people have a cohesion which would actually make them fight for Uganda. So Uganda lost at its creation. That's when it first lost. Secondly, there is also a situation where when we are putting up a constitution to put all the people in Uganda together, the constitution remained very, very silly. It was not a very powerful document. It just remained a silly, defilable document as it has been defiled. Many countries with good constitutions, I'm told the UK has a very good constitution. The US has got a very good constitution. Their constitutions are not personal documents. But the constitutions that we have had all along, which have been used to put up Uganda as one body, have been constitutions of particular people. So much as they are constitutions for particular people, that's where we also lost. We lost because the constitutions were never, which are supposed actually to bind us together. These constitutions have not been documents for all our people in Uganda. Secondly, there is also an understanding which we have failed to have. Actually, we have failed to define our goals as Ugandans, the real goals, what we want to achieve. At the end of the day, because we are stuck, we don't have something to follow properly. We have seen people stealing this, stealing the other, because at the end of the day, what are our values as a nation? The values which would look like they are national values, they are people values. Can you imagine? I'm going to divert a bit. We have a National Institute of Leadership in Chimpanzee. Now, this institute is supposed to cater for all Ugandans. But at the end of the day, what we see is that the institution is actually an institution for a party You see, that's the problem. Where are we having our priorities right? So in that respect, I want to think our goals are muzzled up, our values are also, actually, I should say our values are not uniformly held together, because we can't say we have different way we look at things. Okay, so the making, actually, I want to say the making of Uganda has been rhetoric, actually, I should say, has been a very big problem.
Thank you very much. I think we lost it at a time when we're incepting it. That would be the best statement. The inception was wrong, and the child that was born was wrong. And then as the child grows up, it becomes more problematic. And at the end, people would just think that the child should die so that people can get relieved. Let's go for a break. As we come back, we shall deep again on what do we think is the solution for the precurring problems. Let's go for the break. But don't go away. Our viewers, please just continue watching, express your views, and we shall give you a chance to make sure that you bring in your views as we try to to come to the end of the show, the last 30 minutes of the show. Thank you very much.
Time takes a toll on everyone, they say. Time is merciless, it won't wait for us to change. Time, I am stressing out, I can't figure out what to say. Oh, time, just give us time. Time, looking back on pictures, and I find it hard to see you and myself in places where we used.
Dr. Andrew Takome Kaira was born on 30th January 1945 in a small town known as Nkokonjeru in the Buganda region. He is regarded as one of Uganda's forgotten heroes, a true nationalist whose love for his country sent him to an early grave. He was a lawyer and professor and had many accomplishments since 1971, with many of his accolades attained from his education and political experiences, both nationally and internationally. Significant is his doctoral dissertation titled Conundrum in Uganda, which has awarded him an internationally recognized terminology now used in criminology. He joined several political organizations, including Uganda Freedom Movement, UFM, which he was the leader, the Uganda National Liberation Front, UNLF, later joining the National Resistance Army, NRA, which had once been his organization's rival. Dr. Kaira is regarded as one of Uganda's forgotten heroes, a true nationalist whose love for his country led to his premature death. He was just 46 years old when he was assassinated on 6th March 1987 during a dinner with his close friends and 3 female acquaintances. His killers have never been brought to justice.
Welcome back once again on another episode of the Tower at UNN. We are trying to look into some of the issues that have trended and those pertinent issues that we need to look at if we are to make our country the best country to live in. And as I mentioned earlier, with me in the studios, I have Senior Chendo, who is a writer and a very good historian writer. And we have also Desire. We have had a problem with getting network, a technical problem getting Honorable Kenny Lukyamuzi, but our technical team is making all the possible means to make sure that we rectify the situation, the problem that we're having. Let me bring in Desire. As we went off, we are trying to see where the problem cropped up. I think the whole story always rotates around Buganda as a nation that was annexed to the whole Uganda. And when you look at most of the issues that we all have seen on the way, our political journey, we have seen that all other nations that were brought in try to look at Buganda with a very keen eye and possibly an intrigued eye, in which they think Buganda is a stumbling block into the bigger Uganda. It is always Buganda versus the rest of Uganda. Would you please indulge in this and see, before we go to looking at the solutions, what do you think has made Buganda to be the white chicken among the black?
Mhm. So the question of Buganda is very interesting. As it's been said before, is one thing that we need to realize is that Buganda was a nation, to the point that that wasn't when the Brits decided to come and do the whole 1900 Buganda Agreement. It wasn't that they hadn't heard of Buganda before. They had heard of Buganda years and years ago. Buganda was known within that region. And why was Buganda known becomes a very serious question. It's because Buganda had a system of governance that was very advanced in comparison to the systems of governance within that area. And the only other place that had kind of a similar system of governance within that region, and we're talking about they call it, okay, I'll just say the area close to the River Nile and Lake Nalubari. Within that area, the only other place that would have had like almost close a system of governance, that would be Bunyoro Kitara. And so with the question with Buganda is, here you have people wanting to come and dominate an area. As I said, colonization is about dominance and about taking power away from the people. But then you have a strong system of governance. Buganda had, not only was it economic, but it was politically organized, and it was also socially organized, and it had its own system of governance. So then Buganda starts being a problem, because the primary problem for the colonizer becomes, how do we resolve the African problem? And that includes, how do we address Buganda as a nation and put it in this overall Uganda that we want? Because we all know from Berlin Conference, they went and divided up. So that not only becomes a problem for the colonial masters, but becomes a problem for people who come into the colonial masters' feet, like Obote regime, and become president, because the problem of Buganda still remains. Buganda had its own systems of governance, and that must be recognized, because Baganda as a people still exist and represent Buganda. That history is screaming and haunting. You did talk about how these histories haunt us, but also the histories of our ancestors haunt these systems. So what we have is a fight between, it's not really a fight, it's a fight for the reinstatement, not as it was, but the reinstatement and the respect and the dignity that was stripped away from our ancestors. And that's why they fought to reestablish themselves. So Buganda remains a problem. Because if Buganda wasn't in Uganda, Uganda would not have been assembled the way it was. Again, as we say, 1900 agreement, Buganda had to be part of the assembly of Uganda. And it's been said before on this channel that Buganda had to give up some things for Uganda to be together. And also Uganda had to give up some things for Buganda to join. But then the bigger question that we need to be asking, who was this person saying that we needed to do this and be in this template and have this country, Uganda? So the primary confusion comes about with, this is the lack of cohesion that we've been talking about. It's we find ourselves in this country with different areas, with different interests, and not only Buganda having different interests, but it's because the bringing together of this country alone, all the compromises had to be done by the people in the country. And then the people who are benefiting from this country being together have not compromised anything. So the issue of Buganda and why Buganda is pivotal is because Buganda played a main role in Uganda's assembly, and Buganda will always play a huge role in what the future of Uganda is, because even not only did it do it in terms of affecting it politically, it's also geographically. The capital city was put in Kampala. That then starts to affect politics of the nation, whereby you have, it's matched it geographically, politically, socially, and then economically. Buganda and what was being produced on Buganda's land started to influence Uganda as a country and how Uganda would grow as a country. So that is why Buganda becomes and remains pivotal, whereby people like Museveni, who are delusional, destroying Buganda is the key to him having the paradise or the dynasty that he wishes to lead and sit on. But that's delusion. So, because Buganda will always still play a huge role in what Uganda would look like. So that's the only thing that I have to say about this. Buganda is not an issue. The problem is that the warmongers and the power grabbers and the greedy people make Buganda an issue because they want to crush and erase Buganda for their easy grab to power. That's the thinking, the mentality behind this. And it's the mentality behind the colonizer, where it's how do we resolve the African problem? But they are not a problem if you didn't come to this place and want to dominate. It's the same situation Museveni finds himself in. He's now thinking, how do I resolve the Buganda problem? But Buganda is not a problem. It has been there for centuries and centuries and will remain there for centuries and centuries. So I would propose that we redirect the question to an understanding of where it's a question of someone who wishes to oppress and subjugate people, asking and questioning themselves how to resolve something that is not a problem, but presents itself as a problem to them for their grab to power.
Thank you very much, Desire. Thank you very much. At this juncture, we're gonna go through. We'd like to know to look at what can be the solution to this. When you look at most of the recent talk all over the world, all over Uganda, Ugandans are looking at a better solution that we can have as Ugandans, and people of the diaspora have come up to think that all the other revolutions that have come from the diaspora. And Ugandans are now reorganizing themselves to establish what we call the Uganda Federal Consultative Council, in which they think they are going to start establishing a template, a political or governance template that will be able to, fit in everyone, fit in every institution, and also try to, have a way that whoever comes in power will have to sit into that very, very structure or the template that we want to design as people from the diaspora, the initiative that was brought in by the people of the diaspora. Let me bring in Senior Kyendo. You look at what is happening. According to historians and studies of political studies all over, we find out that Uganda initially, as we mentioned, though you had a different opinion, that Uganda was built on a political structure, which was a federal structure, regardless of the other components or other issues around it. And when you look at all these countries, the bigger countries in the world, they all adopted a federal system of governance. Look at Britain, look at America, look at Germany, all other mentioned states. And here, the Ugandans think that if we are to solve the political problem or this political question, it should be going back to its roots. That is, the nature of the creation of humanity was based on federal system of governance. So people think that if we go back to the federal system of governance, whereby each country or each nation will be fitting into the bigger Uganda, establishing their interests, showing what they can do better than others, and try to do intra-trade or interstate trades, that will help the country to be the best, or to copt a better way of living. I would like you to have your opinion over this idea.
But sometimes we have a problem about lexical items. Now, the lexical items I'm talking about, look at the word federal. Now, when you talk about the word federal, some people already start to grow goose pimples. And yet, if we looked at it as regional governments, that would be a little even better. It would be accommodated, you see. So that's the problem. So whoever is talking about reinstitution of federalism should hide the word federal, but bring the idea. I feel Uganda can still go back to the 70s. One time in the 70s, we had, was it about 10 provinces under AT UNN. That was a very good start, where regional governments would be handled. However, I really feel we need in Uganda to know that, one, we are together and doomed together as Ugandans. Once we understand that, that's very, very important. Secondly, it is not even trendy now to go saying, you see, for us as Uganda, for us as one and so on, we have been invaded, for instance, in Uganda, to the extent that you cannot have 10 people and out of them have 6 people who are Uganda. And yet, those others who are Nakafero, and so on, at the end of the day, we are a kind of mixed grill. So we have to accept ourselves as we are. And when we talk about these regions, we should not be thinking about our tribes, but let us think about the regions and how we can harness them. Yes, and how we can harness them to have development. Indeed, you will find something very interesting. Come to Buganda. Save alone the Sabasajja, who owns the biggest chunk of land. The other biggest land owners are non-Uganda. When you go to places like Buvuma, you go to
Nakaseke,
Kome. You see, at the end of the day, the biggest landlords are non-Uganda. So when we are talking, let us talk as regions. Maybe the others will follow. Secondly, I also feel we need to make a demographic inventory, a demographic national inventory. What am I saying? You know, it is hurting. People don't know what is happening. Do you know who are working in the embassies away from Uganda? You see, leave alone the ambassador, but what about the other staff? Okay, if we go into those, let us look at those. When we make those inventories, then we shall say, here we are wrong. I think we need to make some amendments. Look at who are the permanent secretaries. Okay, and also it is very, very, very important, and very, very important to make it incumbent upon our leaders to respect the institutions of state. First of all, we should respect those institutions by ourselves, me and you and the others. But at the end of the day, when we respect them, because you see, it is very interesting. I want to talk in low tones and yet hard. Can you imagine the Minister for Education in Uganda is Mrs. Janet Museveni? When you go to the Education Service Commission, there is Kajubiri, assistant to the president. I mean, things like that, they look too bad, too ugly. We need to make that inventory and show the whole world that, you see, here we are wrong. We need to restart. Once we restart, I think, go to those people who are there. But now there is also something very interesting. Can you imagine someone fails to be elected as a member of parliament? At the end of the day, this person is brought and is made a minister. What is the message to the electorate? Because politics is supposed to shape our policies. At the end of the day, if you have the number has failed the parliament, same thing, failed. Well, so at the end of the day, things do look very, very bad. But I think we really need this national demographic inventory. One, to see where we are, and then how best we can move forward. So, but I want to think the states, if we really need to have these states, we can have states, but as provinces. Because when you talk about Buganda as a state, those people who have always looked at Buganda with a bad eye will always look at it like that. But when we call it, say, central province, and we know central province inwardly is Buganda, southern province, Karamoja province, something around that. I think that way we will be moving ahead.
Thank you very much. Still with you, Mr. Kyendo, when you look at the precedents that really cropped up in the political structure that we had prior to the 1966, it was a kind of, there's no way you can separate region, locality, and tribe, because one of those issues that make the country look a real country or nation is the identification, or what we call the identity of that institution or that area. When you look at countries like Britain, which have a monarchical kind of federal system, they tend to demarcate depending on the culture. Like if you go to Scotland, they have their culture. If you go to England, they have their culture. And if you go to other places, I mean, that make up the Great Britain, each one of them has its culture, and the way of living is totally different. And again, when you look at things to do with localities, have their way of life. Their, the soil's production is also different. Like you have in Buganda, we have what we grow best. We know what grows best in Bunyoro, what grows best in Busoga and all that. So I think we cannot separate location vis-a-vis the tribes. But again, people have to just understand exactly what we mean whenever we talk about federal, because people have tried to demonize the word federal as something which is bad. And when somebody talks about it, thinking about Buganda in particular, which is not right. Countries like the United States of America, where we're living, we have federal system of governance, and this is not based on tribes. So how do you explain this to a person who is a layperson who is deep in the village to understand exactly what you mean? Because locality cannot be separated from the culture.
Sure, I know it is very, very important that we keep our identity, because when you go to Bugishu, people have got their way of life. Karamoja what and so on. But well, when we talk tribe, that is too low. Whereas it is important, yes, to identify ourselves with our tribes, but there is a very big scenario, a very big problem in places like Buganda. Buganda's culture has been invaded, that you cannot strongly talk about the culture, the real culture. We have sold out the cultural institutions. We have invaded cultural places, decimated actually places of worship, traditional worship. And at the end of the day, when you talk about Buganda culture, it actually defeats you somehow. But let us mainly consider the regions. I know it is important. You cannot do away with the tribe. But right now, when we talk about some of these tribes, they are actually, you know, we have wives, some of our wives are Rwandese. Our daughters have been married to many other forms of integration. So I'm not actually against the tribe itself, but I am saying the tribe can have its own way of dealing with these things. But it's importantly, it should be the region. The region will play a very big, because now if we go to places like Namutamba, the overriding tribe there is actually not Uganda. You go to Kochi, okay? So that's why I'm saying we should mainly talk about the region itself. And for the region, but federalism in Uganda only worked between 1962 to 1966. Yeah, it has been a misnomer. Sometimes people say, for us in Uganda here, ever since, we have always been under federal. No. The kingdom was never a federate state.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me bring in Desire on that note. Desire, Senior Kyendo has tried to, establish his opinion on issues to do with locality vis-a-vis tribe or culture. And he's trying to say that if we are to get this incepted by people of other region, they need to look at it in terms of locality, so that we do not, people will not look at it as a Buganda issue. Desire, can we have your indulgement into this analysis?
In regards to that, is I do see where Senior Kyendo is coming from with the idea of making it be regional, and how that seems to be a silver bullet to all the conflicts that have come out of all of this. But in terms of this, I find it, and this is just my opinion, I find it very crucial. We're living in an era, because I'm a Muganda. I didn't grow up knowing all the cultural norms and all, so we have to look at the position and time that we're in. And this, I'm going to say, not only for Ugandans, but for many Africans on the continent, whereby our culture is basically what makes us who we are. And this has nothing to do with, because I've argued before that the word even tribe, those are just words that were thrown into our vocabulary and made to create differences between one amongst the other. But in regards to this point and how we can reorganize ourselves as a nation, because yes, Ugandans were doomed together, whether we like it or not. Not only will the Baganda be doomed, or the Banyankole, or the Bachiga, or the Batoro, because our system is unitary and together, and because institutions for the nation have been drained, broken, and made fun of. All of us Ugandans are doomed in this together. But what is the way forward for us to be able to re-establish ourselves without totally eradicating what our culture and identity is. Because yes, I do see the convenience of having it in terms of regional voices, but this brings the primary question, and the question at the table that we're not answering is that all these interactions that we've had with the colonizer, with having presidents such as Obote and Museveni, now it's the question of self-governance and sovereignty. Us as people from these different nations, as Baganda, as the Banyankore, as the Karamojas, the people from Karamoja coming together and discussing how we want to govern ourselves, or how we see governance based off of our history and the governance that has pre-existed before, without it being seen as a negation or as a relation to tribes and conflict, and without us having, because regional government is correct and is right, but within those regional governments, we're still going to it's still going to be needed to have the reinstatement of Buganda and Buganda norms, because at the core of all of this, it's the norms of the people being reestablished, because that's what has been taken away. The norms of the people being reestablished, because that was the fabric to rule. That was what was followed for rule. It's the idea of the norms, like the principles. Because right now, what the vacuum in Uganda is a lack of principles. And those principles was provided through people's identity. So it becomes so hard to base it off of just because I find that as the basic, the solution to not have people feel a certain kind of way would be to say, let's make it regional. And we do understand that, yes, Buganda has been infiltrated, and there's many people who live in Buganda who are not Baganda, but that doesn't take away that at least the area that is Buganda be governed by the norms and by the principles as preset by that region. So my question would be, do we see the reinstatement and federalism in Uganda having to narrate alongside that, instead of focusing much on the names? Because the names are just the names, but the main focus and what's very important is this idea of principles of governance, which are provided for through our identity and through how our people govern themselves, and which are lacking in the current system of governance. So do we see a transformation of that sort? Because we lose ourselves in conversations of naming, and then that takes away the light from actually what is important in this process, is what I would say to this idea. Because then what you were saying, it would be very important once those principles are reinstated, because they resonate with someone who's living locally within that area and is of that identity, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I'm making a lot of sense, because this is a pretty raw idea, but this is just my opinion on how reinstatement within this system would look like, because that's what's been taken away, and that's what's caused the confusion that we find ourselves in. Because we are people who are principled but walking principleless, and that is just, and everyone is allowed to just exhibit all manners of lack of principle and decorum. And that's how we're governed as an institution. That's why institutions can hold no strength, because there's no principles holding them together. So I do see how important regional is, but how can then we match it to the culture that's within that region as it has morphed to what it is today?
Thank you very much, Desire. Let me go back to Senior Kyendo. When you hear what Desire says, Desire is making it a point that whatever name that we give the structure, it will always come back to the same thing, because what is the interest here is to establish a system of governance that is based on regional administration, and that will be people working from within their own system, knowing them better and knowing which system, or which if we look at all the sectors, which sector someone does best within that region, that will interact with other states or other region in order to make Uganda as a unity. If you indulge a little bit down there, and would you please give us clearly what your conception of the issue to do with the regional or the federal system of governance and how it works, especially when it comes to, how does power develop from the top to down or from down to the top?
Now, somehow, somewhere, we lost it. Sometime in about 1993, Uganda was actually, the government introduced what they called decentralization. Actually, this was taking power back to the people. That was actually a kind of this federalism coming in. Now, that went for a very long time until recently when we lost it. Because during that time, 1993, it meant you had the services which were actually done at the center taken to the local governments. For instance, you had to have the service commissions, what and so on. But at the end of the day, afterwards, government recalled some of those powers. They recalled the powers to appoint the chief administrative officers and several other powers. Well, you have your posts in the district, but you cannot fill them in. Okay, but where I'm saying we lost it again, sometimes the president, through his amendments of the law somehow, they talked about the regional tier. The regional tier, and within the regional tier, they said, the districts of Buganda shall be deemed to have united. Actually, we lost it when we kicked that. Because that was a very good way to start. But because, one, not every chairman of Buganda was actually a Buganda. Two, being chairman meant a stature. So if you had, again, to go into a kind of unity, that means losing some of your powers. But that's where we lost it. If we had taken up the regional tier, today would be far off. And I want to say, the president himself was happy because much as he was actually proposing the regional tier, he never wanted it. Because when you look at how he has been recalling even these small powers to the center. So I want to think we can always go through those areas. For instance, this regional tier thing, if it is actually, because it is still there within the constitution, okay, much as it is, if it is there and the chairman for, say, for Buganda decide to say, for us now we are together as a unit called Buganda, that is a very good way forward. But we have so far lost it. And much as we lose it, there is something which is also very interesting. The president is working along a re-establishment of the East African community. It's actually a federation. He's looking for federalism. Why would he not want that same spirit replicated downwards? So my problem has been that we have a problem of those people who are holding power. They want all the power. And some of us are not very ready to grab this power away from them. So I want to believe that, yes, the name is important. I want to think it is important. But what is more important are the values, what we want from the federal state, what we want to do. Is it possible to start it. One time, actually, that was 1994 or 92, about that time. The chairman of Buganda districts were at Mpigi, and for them, they said they established Buganda RC5. When they said Buganda RC5, Bidan said, no. For us, we don't have RC5. I was with the Haji Naduli and he said, no, but that's what we want. I want to say there have always been those attempts to recreate the federalism. But our problem has been the lack of people who are willing to bail the cat, I should say. We have failed to stand up to speak to the powers that be, that this is what we know, will help us, or this is what we want. When someone goes in and maybe gets compromised, at the end of the day, that's where we are. So,
yes, if I can indulge a bit, I can chip in a bit there, because in a situation that you're talking about, the regional tier, it is actually not according to federal system of governance and the countries that have tried to benchmark virtually in terms of knowledge, and in a federal system of governance, it is that institution of the of the state that goes into a contract with the government, with the federal government or the central government. And this kind of structure gives the state power to dictate over what they want, or not to dictate, but to mutually agree on what these two levels of power should put in place. Because in regional tier, it would be the state, because it has not, let me give it as a similitude of a marriage. Let's have a similitude of a marriage whereby you have your wife, and in the process, you've been with her for some time, and then here comes a time and say, let's marry officially. You'll find out that there won't be mutual conditions that are put across that you all bear on to have your marriage rotate. Rather, it will be a dictation of what has been happening all along. This is what happens when you bring in the regional tier, because these are states that have not come up prior to the marriage. Rather, they are coming in within the marriage to institutionalize a kind of system that they feel would work out. Don't you think that can be, the region tier can be even worse than a unitary system of governance?
There should always be a starting point. Here is a situation we are trying to grab, to grab power from greedy leaders. At least don't try to actually to frighten them. When you start small, you can always go far. But when you want to get everything at the same time, at the end of the day, you'll find problems. Now, for instance, if we had started on with the regional tier, today we would be far off. I know there would be problems. It would not look exactly like what we want to look like. Because you see, what happened was that people are saying, you see, now the districts can even opt out, okay? And that was very bad. But at the end of the day, if we had it, this would be a very good starting point. There should be a starting point if we should move some length. Otherwise, ever since we talked about the regional tier, that should be over about 20 years.
Yes, it was 2000, I think, 5. That's when 1995, when we put it, we have the new constitution. That's when the tier came in. Yes.
Yes, I want to say, if we had gone at least by that time to grab something, today there would be something. But at the end of the day, ever since we refused the other and have ended up with nothing. the Baganda say omuzizi azimba twe.
And a bird at hand is better than many flying.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Senior Kyendo. That is a very good insight, which needs a very long discussion. Let me bring in Desire on the very same note. Desire, Senior Kyendo is talking about what was, put into the Constitution, in which the Constitution up to now, even that clause is still in, that those districts within a region, if they want, would sit down and make a resolution together, and then they come into an agreement and establish what we call the regional tier. Those those districts within the regional tier, for example, districts of Bunyoro can sit down and make a resolution that for them, they are ready to be in a regional tier that encompasses all the districts which are within Bunyoro, and they would work together in that regard. And would say that he is saying that if we had started up with that, we would be on a journey that has a destination, other than having now being with blank kind of baggage without anything. What is your indulgence into this?
Hey, that's why he's Senior Kyendo, because now I see what the discussion is. Because definitely, if we had just the fact that we don't even have any legs to stand on, like if the regional tier was in place, that gives us legs to stand on and mobility and trajectory. And I see what Senior Kyendo has been saying this whole time. That's why he's senior and has read these things and is knowledgeable on these things, which is true. We cannot deny the fact that every chance to have any mobility towards a governance that we picture or see ourselves in or are comfortable in has been removed. And the starting point that we should investigate is the regional. I now see the importance of reinvestigating the regional tier and what the regional tier would have provided and why we are where we are now, because it explains why Uganda is in the exact position that we are now, because it's a lot of people that just want to grab power for themselves. It's become individualized, and it's individualism in a, what's the word for what we have now? A unitary government without the regional demarcations.
Universality, yes.
Yeah, it's universal, where we have Museveni can wake up and have 3 new districts tomorrow. But if a regional tier was in place at the point in time that it had to be in place, that's not permissible and cannot just happen at the bend of his will. So I now see whereby a regional tier, and that's a discussion that we should have now going forward, is how a regional tier can lean into the governance that we wish to reinstate in place. And there was a question that was put in the chat, and the question was, what did other nations have to give up to be a part of Buganda? Because there's this perception that only Buganda gave up something. And I would like to just clear the air on that discussion, that every nation that was put in Uganda had to give up one big thing, and it's the biggest thing that us all humans are fighting for, and what different people are fighting for, and that is the right to self-determination and sovereignty. That had to be given up by every nation that was put in this template. And that, once again, is going to be something that we don't give up, but we hand in together for a further discussion of how do we move. I now see Senior Kyendo's argument, how do we move from regional into leaning into our specific, and then culture meets it halfway.
Thank you very much. We seem to be running out of time, because the discussion would have gone further than that. But I would ask my producer to make sure that it puts for us a number that people can send and participate in this discussion as we go along. And actually, we want you, the viewers, to also put your head into this and try to call us on that number on the screen, and please call and be able to participate in this important discussion, which really seems to be a very good direction of what we are now and what we need to take up. Let's, as we go ahead, waiting for the callers and voices in, something which needs to be understood here is that the packaging of information, especially at the time of the CA, was really very, very important to ponder on, because Buganda, we are saying that despite the fact that we are being given the regional tier, it seemed like it was packaged in a way that it was the impression was that there was no big will of the will was not there. Though they were speaking it out, the will was not there, because it was not binding, especially to those states or to the districts. A district can opt out at any time or would come in at any time, which wouldn't make a lot of sense. Would you please, Desire, try to put up as well on this?
That is why the only state in which regional tier would be of the essence, because the regional tier in my mind right now, and based off of this discussion, only comes into place to play as a tool for that nation, as a tool to lean into federalism and the federal governance. So what was given before was an empty shell. But what happens when a regional tier is actually equipped to run on the norms and the principles that are preset within that area? If the regional tier is for central, and the regional tier is a step to, I see the regional tier would only function as a step to lean into what would be then federal. And because we need these, again, these are nations. Ankole was a nation, Buganda was a nation. All of these places that, and also nations and chiefdoms that have been put together with what is called Uganda. So how does Buganda continue to have its own sovereignty within Uganda? And how is this supported of the regional tier? So again, the argument would be that the regional tier would be just a trajectory into that, as long as the principles, the norms, and the systems of governance within that area, let's say if it would be central government is still, what would be the central region? The central region is still governed off of the norms, the principles of Buganda as preset by Buganda, everything in terms of economy, politics, and the military and the army. And this is all part of then what would be the governance of that region would be for that nation. That's the only way that I see. That's why it didn't function. It didn't function because no power was given to the region. It is useless to have regional government without giving power to the region. It's like giving California is the region, but the California government has no power.
Thank you
and
very
that's
much.
what was done in Buganda's case.
Thank you very much. Senior Kyendo, I think you here, because you have been, prior to this discussion, you were very categorical that if in the, because I know you are an expert in the decentralized system of governance. And we had a very pertinent issue that you mentioned, that regardless of having the decentralized system of governance, there was no power at the district. Or initially it was there, but it was recalled. And actually, this would be the very same thing that would happen with the regional tier, as Desire has mentioned. You'll find out that you will not have, if you don't have power, because the most important in all this devolution is the power, centering power into the federal government or the top government will not, the president will be so powerful that he does not allow any other institution to work, because those institutions are all in his hands. He is the one that directs them. But if we have regional or federal system of governance, you'll find out that there's that devolution of power from the top to these people, to these other levels of power, and these people can share it with their own people. How do you think this can come up if we had to do with the regional tier as a starting point?
Didn't have whereas we didn't have the regional tier taking off, there are several other aspects which have come into play. which actually show that the regional tier issue would have been very good to start from. For instance, when you go to Mbale, there is a day when the Vamasaba come to a place called the Zitiba Mutoto, when they are starting the circumcision period. All the Vagishu come to that area because they know that's their area. Secondly, when you look at Buganda, much as we didn't take up the regional tier, but when it is time to celebrate, say, the Kavaka's birthday,
Coronation,
coronation, what and so on, all districts come up together. I want to say, these people did not want to give up power, much as they talked about the regional tier. But if we had agreed that for us as Buganda, we have agreed to have our districts as one entity, and our titular head is the Kawaka. That would be very interesting, because if you would like to say, for me, Mokono, I no longer want to be in the regional tier, you would be bound because the titular head is there and you cannot shame him. This would be very good for every area. So I want to think these people knew that, well, given our greediness, maybe would not allow it. Otherwise, it was something they also feared, and they were actually, they found themselves on the winning side when we refused what they offered. But incidentally, the government ends up paying again the Kabakas, they give them some amounts. Secondly, you would not simply move away. You would not simply take away this power. If we have the likes of Mabirizi, I don't know whether you people have been following up with Mabirizi. He's our litigant of the day, of the time. Every time he finds there is something worth litigating upon, he's going. We would be having the Mabirizis of our days actually fighting for us. At the end of the day, the regional tiers would survive.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Senior Kyendo. That insight, I think, has just come into people's ears, and I think we shall have you one day, and then we add on people like, we have some other Federalist people that would share a very good, make a very good conversation in this regard. Let's have the voices from the producer that have been sent as we wait for the caller, and then from there, we shall see what we can do as we try to come to the end of our show.
Dr. Juuko, thanks for the show. This is AT UNN. I want to make a disclaimer with our co-host, Mr. Kyendo. I don't know whether he can tell us about Buganda and Uganda. Formerly, before unitary government came in, it was one word, Buganda. But when unitary system started within our country, then Buganda was diverted to Uganda. So it will not be a complaint to the Ugandans that if federal comes, will divert. Moreover, when we see it that during Amin's regime, it was regional. So even if you don't talk of central, eastern, you can even put it in a compass direction that north, east, then you end up again with the federal arrangement system. Thank you. Maybe another point to mention is to give you a small brief about Kyankwanzi. Kyankwanzi is a corruption place that when you want to be corrupted, you are taken to Kyankwanzi. Kyankwanzi is in a desert place, is in a fully strategically located there to hide away people from truth. It is by evidence. And because there is no love with unitary government, they cannot make even that road from Bukwiri to Kyankwanzi, because I know that place very well. Formerly, there was even a school of the late Cardinal Suvuga, St. Kizito, but all those places were dumped, but because it's a corruption dump place, so they tend to hide people down there so they can be corrupted. But federal is the best way to lead our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead. We shall try to write down those points and then we'll be answering after some others.
Good evening, Doctor. I'm Stephen. Good evening, the rest of you on the panel. But I think I would like to know the governance. I think you need the governance where people will be feeling it and it is theirs, holding it to it. So by calling a name of the region, people will feel that they are the persons who are in the system. I think the name also matters. So if you say you want to change from Buganda, because I think the only problem is now with the Buganda name, but for the rest they're okay. Why? The rest they're okay. If you say Acholi State, they will be okay. But if you say Buganda region, so but also Buganda need to feel their state. So I think that also should be looked into. And the next, you're talking about the regional tier. With the Museveni's strategies, all have been to fight institutions. It would even be more easier to fight within the regional tier. If he can pay amounts of money to a person, can he go to a district he wants to sabotage? Thanks for presenting.
Thank you very much. Let's have another one. Do we have another one? If we don't have, then let's...
Hello, good evening, everybody. Dr. Juuko Jerale. Ugandans, we were deceived by the colonial masters. They never gave us independence. It was pseudo-independence they gave us. You cannot give somebody fish and not teach them how to fish. That's what exactly we got. And these masters made sure that they found men, very corrupt men, greedy men, regime after regime, who are ready to kill and destroy our country. And they supported them, they gave them guns, and they gave them money.
Okay, let's have the caller.
Juuko. These colonial masters can never allow Uganda's economy to be in any better shape, because they have to blackmail Uganda for the minerals, the tourism, and each and everything that they get from this country. So when you see what is happening, it is not by coincidence. These land issues, wars and everything was designed by these people, list after list, and it was supposed to happen the way it is happening. They are just behind the curtain, driving each and everybody in Uganda to disaster. The white people can never leave Uganda as long as they have corrupt dictators whom they give license to kill and keep governance for years and years, so that these white people could achieve what they plan to do when they gave us pseudo-independence. Uganda's independence is on paper. In reality, the independence they gave us cannot govern and protect Ugandans and their property, because these properties were designed to belong to these white people. Dr. Juuko, when you see this Milo land and all the design that were made in Bunyoro, Fort Portland, wherever, There was something hidden that we didn't understand. What these white people knew that they will come to climb through these dictators like they are doing now. Because Uganda's freedom was built in lies, this lie has spread. People are poor. You can see an example on the internet, how people are lying through their teeth. Nobody's telling anybody the truth simply because each and everybody needs money. And the people who have the money, they are the people who are in the armpits of these colonial masters. I'm going to give you an example of a white woman who is leading Uganda, whose colonial master, her bosses are going to give her make her a general, because this lady became a citizen of Uganda in 1990. As we speak, Dr. Juuko, this lady is Uganda's ambassador in 3 countries: Netherlands, Luxembourg, and UE. She also sits on the committee of ICC, where each and everything that should deal with the atrocities that are committed in each and every country, this woman is Museveni's fixer. She's the one always washing Museveni's face, cleaning all the dirt. I think, Dr. Juuko, you remember brilliant genocide in the north, Kasese Madras, the deaths during the election, and each and every atrocity in Congo. These cases are in ICC. But because this woman is Museveni's fixer, she's an ambassador to Uganda, she sits on ICC committee. She has blocked each and every strength for the ICC to give people justice. And this justice will never be achieved because it is 20 years now since the Congo massacre happened and nothing happened. Museveni has never been held responsible. Even the majors that killed the people in Kasese were vindicated and now they are promoted to bigger parts. Why is a white woman still an ambassador in 3 countries? I'm asking why. Isn't there any other Ugandan? Is she smart enough to be an ambassador in 3 other countries and then sit on ICC? Who gives somebody so much power? Dr. Juuko, this woman is so powerful, she's second in this country, Uganda. This woman is so powerful that she exiled a human rights lawyer called Mukasa, who had gone to ICC to inquire about the cases of the brilliant genocide. She reported him and told him openly that your life is finished. The following day, they were arresting his wife, and the man has never returned to Uganda. So Ugandans, I'm asking, is it about land? Is it about the kingdoms? Is it about each and everything you are fighting for? Don't you think that you can never fight for anything when the playground you are supposed to fight in is full of gas and very, very poisonous gases? You have to clean the playground first for you to talk about Land. There are so many things that are so urgent, like the Kabaka's health, like the COVID situation, like how people are dropping dead because of hunger, because of wrong vaccination. These land issues are as important as all of you think they are. If you don't fight for the Ugandans now and chase away a woman like Black, that is her name, So Black, SOW, Black is BLAAK, out of Uganda, because she's not alone. She has other fixers. How can she fix a president of the people of Uganda and then you expect any good results when she's a daughter of the colonial masters? Thank you very much.
Let's have around 2 of them, and then we try to answer this question.
Good morning, viewers. Good morning, UNN. Thanks for the show. My question goes to Mr. Kyendo. But let me ask my question in Uganda so that ewulikika bulungi. Sebo Mr. Kyendo, kwebaziza nnyo enteesaayo. Naye njagala okujjukiza nti Uganda terina constitution, terina government. We have a mafia government. Tulina gavumenti okuva gavumenti yagibwawo mu 1967 oba 1966 we balumbira Muteesa. Sina kuwulirako ng'odiscussinga ku constitution ya 1962 eya negotiating political system ya Uganda ya federal. Naye odiscussinga constitution ya Museveni eyakolebwa Museveni n'omuntu omu. Kuba constitution tiyakolebwa bannayuganda. Nkubuuza constitution gyogereramu yakolebwa bannayuganda oba yakolebwa muntu? That's my first question. My second question is, lwaki ofa nnyo ku ggwanga gye twasenza ne bafuuka bannaffe, lwaki bo bakulembeza nnyo okusinga eggwanga eryabasembeza? Ekyokubiri, Museveni tewali kyaleeta nti oba region tier nga bwe yagireeta nga teyamba ye. Lwaki tukkiriza region tier nga tusobola okukkiriza federal system entuufu ne tujjawo ebizibu byonna? Kubanga ekitusinze okukwetera Uganda ebizibu kwe kuleka ekituufu ne tukola ekisanyusa omuntu at the end of the day ne tukonflictinga mu maaso eyo. Kati nkubuuza, kizibu ki gwe kyolaba nti singa tugamba nti eno yenfuga gye twagala ya federal system nti ate omuntu omu agenda kunyiiga, abantu abamu bagenda kunyiiga? Kubanga teri Munyankole agenda kunyiiga, teri Mutoola agenda kunyiiga, okuggyako Omunyarwanda yagenda okunyiiga ku lw'ensonga talina waagwa mu ggwanga Uganda. Ate nga bwe tuba tukoze federal agenda sigala nga Munnayuganda, either abeere Muganda oba abeere Munyankole. Nkubuuza, constitution ki gy'osinziirako okwogera gwe byeyogera, eya Museveni oba eya 1962, oba tuddemu tukole constitution endala nga implementing a federal system? Ekirala ssebo, bw'otuzzayo nti ate mu regional tier, wange ogambye mbuno omuzizi azimbya ttwe. Njagala kukubuuza ssebo mukadde waffe, bukyanga Museveni ajja mu ntebe, Ssaabasajja Kabaka n'Emmengo bateesa naye okuddiza Buganda ebintu byayo, yali abibaddiza, tebakutte empola myaka emeka gino. Kyogamba nti Museveni byakola tabimanyi, oba ababbi ba NRA ebibakola tebabimanyi. Wali oddeko kye bayita 50 years master plan, kati bagikyusa 100 master plan. Abo ogenda kuteesa nabo ki? Era ogenda kukwata nabo mpola ki? Okuggyako oyagala batutwalirize paka ffenna ye batumalayo eggwanga lyonna balitwale. Wali osomeko ku kigambo kye bayita obwenge. Nkusaba oddeyo ssebo mukadde waffe okisomeko, n'ekirala oddeyo okusome ku 50 years master plan y'abasajja bano, then oddemu odiscussinga wetegeeze kye bayita federal. Kubanga kye tulwanira federal eno bali mu kuggyawo ggwanga lyaffe, gw'okyali mu byakuteesa nti tukusooke tukwate kano tukwate kali, tukole template nga egenda kusolovinga ebizibu ebiriwo kati n'ebirijja. Ekibuuzo kyange ekisembayo, ssebo Mr. Kyendo, okimanyi nti bye tukola kati abaana baffe abagenda okujja bagenda okusangawo byokola obikola ng'obyekoleranga ggwe ne bakulu banno, oba okolera generation egenda okujja oluvannyuma lwa generation yene eriwo? Because bye tukola kati tukolera generation egenda okujja nga tegenda kutawaanyizibwa nga bagenda teeka buteesi mu nkola. Ne mmwe mufokasinga nnyo ku birowoozo byammwe mmwe bakadde baffe abakulu, era bye byatuleetera ebizibu, ne mutefokasinga ku generation ezigenda okujja n'ebizibu bizigenda okusanga. Tubadde tukusaba odiscussinge by'odiscussinga ng'osinziira ku generation ezigenda okujja, so si ng'osinziira ku Museveni tagenda tuwa buyinza, bwe tunaakwata ennyo tebajja tuwa buyinza. Tudiscussinga ekifuga kituufu bwe kinaba ffe kitulabe abaana baffe bajja kukiggusa, naye nga kye kituufu nga weekiri tulambike abaana baffe nga ensi endala bwe zikikoze. kubanga ffe mu zizona ze tusomyeko saa zino ku federo tulaba mmwe bakadde ffe mwe mwatubuza kubanga ffe tukuza abamama baffe batugamba federo nti ya Buganda. Kati the same thing you are talking about regional tier. Ebintu ebitubuzaabuza omunyankole amanyi nti munyankole omusoga amanyi omuntu yekka complaininga mu Uganda ye munyarwanda omuntu okyogerako fine babawasaamu naye balina okukimanya nti balina okukkiriza we bali oba ali mwankole abeere mwankole bali mu Uganda abeere mu Buganda. Rwanda gwanga balina ne president waabwe w'e Rwanda mu Uganda temuli munyarwanda abavuka banna Uganda they have to accept where they are. Oba ali mu Buganda they have to take that. Tubadde tusaba temukola bintu bigenda kutawaanya generation yaffe neyanziza.
Yes, I think let's hold on from there, and then we have to answer those questions before we bring in other callers. First of all, before I bring in if you can read properly what our discussion has been today, it has been a political history of Uganda and what went wrong, the political question that was not answered. Mr. Kyendo has been trying to talk about the past situation. He's not talking about the future because we have not indulged into what are we going to do. He is discussing a situation that happened, and he's saying that instead of staying without anything in our hands, we would have stayed with regional tier. He's not saying that he's advocating for regional tier. I think that would be corrected. He will also bring it over as we try to. Let me bring in Mr. Kyendo. We have a lot of questions. Can we have the caller before we bring in Mr. Kyendo? Let's call. Yes, caller. Yes, caller, go ahead and tell us what you want to contribute.
Neeyanziza okunzikiriza okubuuza ekibuuzo kyange kye nnina.
Yes.
Neebaza nnyo Dr Juuko ne banno mu studio za UNN olwaleero.
Thank you.
Mpuliriza bulungi ebigambo bya Senior Ahamed Kyendo, naye nze nange nina we sikkiriziganya bulungi naye agamba nti twanditudde regional tier neebeera nga starting point okututuusa ku federal system. Naye njagala okumujjukiza nti regional tier oba ligite regional tier si kye kimu ne federal. Era n'eyakituwa yali takituwa mbu tutandikira tutuuke ku federal, yali akituwadde nga kyekyo kyasobola okutuwa kubanga mu regional tier obuyinza abuteekayo era n'abugjayo waayagalidde. Kyekyo kyekiri mu regional tier. So nga ate wali mu federal tukkaanya obuyinza obuba buteekeddwa mu regions bo bubeera bwa regions tebumala gagibwayo. So ono omusajja kye yali akola yali akimanyi, naye ate lwako wano kati ono Senior Kyendo alinga agamba nti twandikitandikidde wano paka twandituuze ku federal. Omusajja si kugamba nti tugenda kumubuzaabuza kye yali akola yali akimanyi. So tewali gamba tumubuzaabuza tutandikire ku tier tutuuke ku federal. Federal tajagala ye ng'omuntu. Ono omusajja he's a unitarist. Era asobola kukkiriza ekyo kya regional tier kyokka wamanye nti ateekayo obuyinza n'abugjayo n'akola bw'ati n'akyankalanya bw'ati kyasobola okukomako kyokka. Era tagambangako nti tutandikire awo tutuuke ku kiri nedda. Ate tewali na nsonga lwaki tutandikira ku tier ne tutagenda ku federal kubanga bwe kiba tetwasalawo mu commission ezateekebwawo ate lwaki twali tetukigendamu yakigaana bugaanyi ye ku lulwe takyagala y'ensonga enkulu. Kati wabona ekino kyagambye nti twagenda mu president agoberera nnyo ekya East African Community n'agamba nti eyo nayo federation. Kati n'amala n'abuuza lwaki yandyagadde federation ku level eya waggulu n'atagyagala kugizza wansi waffe e Uganda. Kati nakino kankimujjukize nti president ye yali akyogera lunye, President Museveni talaba lwaki tufederatinga wano wansi ku small unit ye ayagala kya waggulu eri. So Senior Kyendo either atubuzaabuza oba sekyo ayina ensonga ze yeerabidde. Sijja kwogera bingi kankomawo n'abalala bateese. Neeyanziza UNN.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's start with let's have Mr. Kyendo. Senior Kyendo, can you answer some questions as we try to advance?
I want to thank the respondents the other side, it has been good that people have been actually listening, and it is encouraging, especially for you, the host, when people give in this kind of feedback. But I want to say, if we are going to solve any issues, we shall not solve them by being angry. Okay? Let us soberly discuss. That's how best we shall get to the right thing. Now, there is a situation, I'm going to say, I'm sorry to sound a bit religious. Sometimes we as Muslims, we were saying, you see, these people are not appointing us, what and so on. So someone said, you beat them at their game. Go and read. If you have just a bachelor's, go for a master. So that when they say they want a master's, it is there. Beat them at their game. Now, if this president said, I'm giving you regional tier, take it and say, now this is what we have. At the end of the day, he would look awkward by undoing what he claimed to want to perform. Secondly, someone asked about the constitution. Actually, if they listened properly, they said our constitutions have been silly documents, defiable, okay, easily definable like it has been. The 1962 constitution was such silly because it contained a lot of loopholes which were not plugged. At the end of the day, it couldn't be sustained. At the end of the day, afterwards, these other constitutions have been actually people's documents. Never have we had a constitution that reflects the feelings of all of us. That has been my argument, that actually these constitutions have been made in favor of regimes, in favor of the juntas. We really need to start once again to find a way of at least having a constitution that can last the test of time. There's this Munyolo lady, I don't know, she was talking about Buganda and Uganda as if something was not properly put up, but I want to think Buganda is actually the starting point of Uganda. In the 1900, I think the 1900 agreement, these people wanted to write, I think that's where Uganda starts. Instead of it isn't actually the Buganda agreement, should be the Uganda agreement of 1900. That's when the colonialists started at least building up Uganda. And it is through that agreement that Uganda lost its sovereignty. Buganda started to lose its sovereignty from the 1900 agreement, especially when the regents acting on behalf of the young Daudi Chwa assented to very many issues which were actually relegating the kingdom of Buganda. So Buganda, yes, gives rise to Uganda. Okay, but what is interesting also, when you go to Kenya, whether you are Anacholi or Munyoro or what, they'll say, our Waganda. Everyone from Uganda is actually a Muganda when you go the other side of Kenya. So that is not a very big issue. But I really want to think we should have a starting point. If we are going to make a headway, we really need a starting point. Someone says even a journey of thousands of miles, at least you need a step to start on. So that's my feeling about regional tier. It's not that I want regional tier. I'm not even here to advocate for it, but I'm here trying to say, can we have something to start with so that we can move? The moment we say we should wait, what and so on, we shall go very many years without anything tangible. I can't exhaust everything, but I also apologize where I have not made a substantive treatment to the questions. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Desire, you have had the senior Kyendo trying to answer some of the questions. There are some questions of which we are quite clear to almost everybody. Would you answer some of those questions as well?
Firstly, I would like to thank, Senior Kyendo, because the points that he's brought out today out of our history have increased the discussion and put the discussion forward of what would actually, how do we, I think my answer to most of the questions and what we need to clarify is that exactly what's been mentioned is that we had an opportunity to have regional ties and that was grabbed away. And there have been some answers or some questions that have alluded to the point that regional would function and make it easier to take away power from the regions and put it back into the unitary government. But then also another question is that why don't we have regional now if regional would so easily? And I'm not even advocating for regional, as many people are not, but as many people here are not today. But I think what's been made important is for us to go back and revise as to why regional was not allowed to even get to live for even a short period of time. What could it have offered us and how can we strategize moving forward?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's have some around 4 more voices and then we make our roundup talk. Yes, our producer, can you give us some of the voices as we try to wind up?
I would want to ask the speaker guest that these regions he's talking about, we had them from Obote 1, Amin, Lutwa, and all up to today with Museveni. They have never worked. And if you recall, we were born in the 60s. We lived in the federal system. Things were working well. And you can't convince me, Mr. Guest Speaker, sir, that by calling these areas regions, that it would be a better idea, because regions, then you will say that if, say, like Western region, it is what is happening like now, that Mchiga is governing Hoima, but Mnyoro is not governing in Kabale. So it's going to be a one-sided power. Please try and clarify on that.
Thank you.
Sebo tubebaza nnyo program n'ensonga gye mukkatirizaako ku federal. Naye eddoboozi limu amakalemera amala. Naye obuzibu bwe mulina nti mulowooza ebintu byonna above and ahead of Buganda. Naye ng'ekirowoozo ekyandibadde ekituufu kusooka kuddira amawanga agakola Uganda. Amawanga ago gaddeyo gonna gatuuze abantu baago n'obuvunaanyizibwa bwago bateese ku butya bwe beetaaga okufugibwa oba butya bwe beetaaga okusigala mu union oba obutabeeramu. Tufune cooling off period ya myaka 3. Abaganda tuddeyo mu mpya zaffe tweteeseeko, tuteese n'enfuga ki gye twetaaga okusinziira ku constitutional monarchy yaffe gye tulinanga mu Buganda. Tuddeyo tuteese n'abakalamojja n'abalango n'abasebbeyi, tulabe buki kye baagala nga ffe tumaze okwenyweza munda nga tuli resolved ku byaffe byonna. Naye mututwala buli lunaku mutubuulira federal nga mulese entity ya Buganda eya Bunyolo n'endala zonna nga temumaze kutegeera status quo yaazo kyeki, naye muddira abantu abali ewamu abali half baked mubateeke wamu era tugenda kudda mu kintu kyekimu kisse nga vuddemu ekyo ekya Uganda tekijja kukola. We all have to retract back to our status quo nti Omuganda addeyo ku nnono ze ateese mu myaka egy'esatu alabe oba ayagala okubeera mu union era union gy'ayagala okubeeramu egenda kubeera etya ng'aditamininga prosperity n'okukulaakulana okw'enjawulo ez'engeri mu bantu be n'okwekulaakulanya. Naye si ebyo byakutulambika mu buli kakica yenna tumukooye for 59 years abantu balala bazze with nothing on the table but being exploitive.
It's only that we couldn't have that one as a call. Otherwise, would have told us that those the 3 years is talking about. I mean, what will be happening and will be in charge of that of that lag. Let's go ahead and have some call.
Omukyala bamuyita jjajja wa UNN bambi kirungi nnyo kimanyi kitegeera bulungi naye bannange kubanga oyogera kendeezaamu ka sipiidi bakinaaba kimpisiza bubi nnyo kumekikasonkusobola kubanga ebigambo byonna bibadde oyogera bambi jjajja tukusaba nze mwennyini nkusaba bambi kendeezaamu ku sipiidi.
Okay, everyone is entitled to his opinion, and we don't own any person's opinion. Everybody is free to view out his opinion, and you have the right also to perceive any of the opinions. I hope we having we almost have.
Good evening, good morning. Yonna gyemusinziira mwebale kuweereza. Mukulu Katerega host waffe omulungi Adamu Desire ne baguests mwena batumiddeko bassibu nze sijja kwogera luzungu manyi lutono ennyo ddala. Kati kyembadde njala agamba omukulu oyo mukulu Kyendo tukusanyukidde ssibu webale kujja ku UNN lino ssomero tusoma era tubadde nga tusoma batusomesa okugatta dots wano. Mukulu Kyendo bino ebya gundi ebya tusooke tukwate kano tukwate kali tukwate ku kino then tulyoke tugatte tufune ebyo si gwe mulamwa gwaffe wano eno ku UNN edda enkola ya gundi yabali abatufugazza ate wano omulamwa gwe tulina gwa federo nti federo yo kenyini ejja etwanguyiza omulimu kubanga yo kenyini egukutulamu ng'era bw'ogitegeera federo kitegedde mukulu nti oli Mbabazi oba Besigye nga bwe balina ebirowoozo ng'era Mulangira bwe yakikonyeeko eggulo nti ebyo ebirowoozo bye birungi abitwale eri ekigezi ne Mwami Museveni nga bw'awoza nti w'omwankole waffe gye yeesiba ffe gye tugamba nti si waayo ebirowoozo bye birungi abitwale ankole bizimbe enkole n'aba Buganda kutyo abeesebbeeyi kutyo omulimu tugukutule bwe gutyo gubeere mwangu so si bino ebyokubeera n'omuntu omu nga yalina okulowooleza Uganda yonna. Kitegedde mukulu Kyendo kyekyo federo wano gwe mulamwa ebyo bya regional tier biki ate kwata kano kwata kali omuntu omu yaba alowooleza eggwanga nedda. We cannot tolerate that anymore.
Yes, I think we're not gonna go beyond this. Let's have Senior Kyendo answer those few questions, and then we can see how we try to wind up.
Yes, I want to thank the contributors once again, but they still forget. Now, when the 1993 Ebyafe bill was made in Uganda here, people presumed that the Kabakaship had been reinstated. That's what they presumed. But when you read the law, it talks about the corporation soul. It talks about the restitution of only one person, not the kingdom of Wakabaka. Actually, in Uganda, people have been very good. They accepted that restitution, and they have actually tried to build Wakabaka even when they know that there is no Obwakabaka legally in Uganda, but they have built it around that aspect that was restituted. You see, otherwise, we don't even have a legal government in Mengo that the minister was on. It is a bitter truth. What was restituted was only the Kabaka. Can you imagine a Kabaka without a dominion? And people have not been fighting for that. You see, you can't have a Kabaka without the realm, without the kingdom. So, what has happened is that people have lived with it, and we are building it. Actually, today when you come and start talking about Uganda, when you say it is not a legal institution, people will look at you and say, what are you talking about? You'll even feel ashamed. And yet, that is the law. So my thinking is that if we had a start, like we had a start for the Kabakashi, okay? Otherwise, these sub-county and county offices, what and so on, they're just redundant. They can't do anything. But for us who believe in the institution, we treat them as real institutions which are around. So I'm saying it is important that at least there should be some start, somehow, somewhere. I wanted to end with one issue. In Uganda, we only had the federal system from 1962, which worked actually up to 1963 or 4, because that's when the fights started. When there was that fight, nothing was moving. At 1966, actually, it was only a yeah. Otherwise, the one when we talk about the federal, it was only for 2-3 years. Okay, we really need a kind of governance that will actually put us together as Buganda, as Bunyoro, as any other cohesive region, so that we move in the developmental area.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kyendo. As we try to wrap up, we have an establishment that was initiated among the diasporas, which is called the Uganda Federal Consultative Council, which is yet to convene in the near future about establishing, restructuring the new Uganda, or the Uganda that we think can do the best. And in this regard, I want you in 2 minutes to ponder upon this kind of arrangement whereby we feel that would be one of the best way we can restructure and restore the lost dignities of these institutions, and also trying to establish sector policies that we think can be the best for the country in terms of social, political, and those sectors that really make up governance, or the governance of a country. So I would like you in 2 minutes to ponder about that and show your reservation about what you think the the Uganda Federal Consultative Council can do in order to rejuvenate the spirit and the problem that the political question that has not been answered all along. Let me start with the Desire.
In regards to that, is we all know that the primary problem has been the primary problem we all face is governance and bad leadership, and that's the problem of Uganda. But also, it's been what has happened. Also, we've seen ourselves as spectators, non-participatory, and we just hear news from the government, which has driven the nation now into a failed state. So it is important that Ugandans start coming together and envisioning. I think that things like the UFCC are the start of visioning, because there has been a lack of visioning past Museveni. I grew up in an era whereby Museveni was the president by the time of my birth, to the point that there was arguments that no one could even govern Uganda past Museveni. So what needs to be happening is not only a rebirth of a leader, which came with the Bobi Wine campaign, whereby our trajectory was just envisioning another leader that can take over Museveni. But then after time, we've realized it's that the whole system of governance needs to change, and we need to re-envision how we want to be governed as people in this template, because it showed that even just changing the leader was not the answer to the Uganda political problem, which still remains: how do we govern ourselves as a people? And especially in the face of what AT UNN was saying, in the face of strong imperialism and our colonial masters still playing a huge role. I was shocked to know that a Dutch-born citizen within the history of the colonial context is actually an ambassador of Uganda in 3 different countries, and has also represented and helped Uganda through so many cases that have involved brutality and killing of Ugandans. Like us as Ugandans should take this seriously and re-examine what colonialism is. I think these forums are going to produce a revision period for us Ugandans, but also through that revising, we're going to have a vision of what Uganda could be and how Uganda could be governed in the geographical area that it is, which still remains the African continent and in East Africa. How can we start to vision and see just a different kind of governance for African peoples? Because we pay the price all the time, and it's our people that get killed. It's our people that get exploited. It's our resources that get exploited, and it's our people that are dying of hunger.
Okay, Desire, can you please say bye-bye to our viewers as you try?
So what I would like to say as I say bye-bye to the viewers is that let us today, first I want to thank everyone on the panel for the discussion that we've had today. I've learned a lot, and also as we receive ideas and take in ideas and exchange ideas, I think the only thing that I would like to say is that to be in a position whereby going forward, and this is what I hope for UFCC, is to have a place whereby ideas are received, even though you agree with them or you disagree with them, but see the information behind the veil. Because for me, one question will always remain haunting the place that we are at now. And that was the question that Dr. Andrew Kayira asked: mwagala buyinza oba mwagala bitiibwa oba mwagala buyinza? We're still at that point in time whereby if we reinstate federal and we reinstate a new form of governance, we must make sure that power is given back to the people, and that should be our primary goal as I live today. And this should be held within every discussion that we have. It's for Ugandans as a people to attain the power, and for it never again to be given to a small group of people or just one man to decide what they want or what they wish to do with the whole nation.
Thank you very much, Desire. Thank you very much for the insight, and with pleasure to have you all the time, because all along we have you, and you bring us a lot of a lot of flavor in the discussion, because that is how we want Uganda to be. The way you bring it in, the way you give your idea gives us more courage that we have young people that can push this country together in the near future. Thank you very much, Desire. I hope we shall have you another day. I think our viewers, the other time, were asking me where you went, and I told them she'll be here soon. Thank you very much. Before I bring in Senior Kyendo, there is one person that we cannot leave behind. So let's have the producer send the message, and then we have Senior Kyendo too.
This gentleman is misleading us. Buganda agreement was an agreement which was agreed and prearranged by the entity of Buganda Kingdom, nothing else but Buganda Kingdom. So it is not in any way subscribed to any capacity of Uganda. So that is the problem that these people have followed up, the elderly people. Buganda is an entity. It negotiated its share of the ground and governance. That's why there's the 1900 agreement. It's nothing to do with Uganda.
Thank you. I think Senior, let's have that answered, and then from there you talk about what you think UFCC can help us, and then finally there is one person, one viewer who has his question here. Mr. Kyendo, your tier idea doesn't work. We have had enough of getting pieces. We need a governance. We need a governance platform, not bukunkumuka. Uganda is our country, not Museveni's property. We all belong to this country called Uganda. Thank you very much, our viewer, for that question. So let's have Senior Kyendo to answer this question, and then finally he will talk about the UFCC, and then he will give his final remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Juuko. But I want to say I'm not here to win. I don't want to win. I'm actually here to share. Especially during this age, all our answers to our questions, we just Google them, and you'll always find good write-ups for some of these issues. So because I'm not going to win, I really don't want to win about the Buganda agreement and the Uganda agreement and what and so on. But I only want to look at the Uganda Federal Consultative Council. There is this adage of putting the cart before the horse. You see, federalism, if it has to feature anywhere, there should be a law. And this law should be the Constitution. It is very, very important that whoever is out there listening should know that we have had a very big problem with the constitutionalism in Uganda. We really need to have an input of all Ugandans to make a constitution that can actually last. These constitutions, as I said earlier, they have been abused. Now, you can't talk of Uganda Federal Consultative Council without a framework where it will fit. As long as you don't have a framework, or as long as the framework is faulty, what you are trying to discuss will still be faulty. So I want people to think about pressing for a new constitution. That one will be a very good way to have the federal ideas implanted. Secondly, it is very, very bad to think of the word federal as if it were a Buganda issue. Never. Federalism is actually a form of governance. Whenever we talk about it, let us embrace it as Ugandans Okay, not only limited, but we see sometimes we speak with a lot of force, talking about federal. Actually, we are even calling it federal. Uganda, if we want federalism, it is okay. But let us make sure that the framework where we shall put our consultative ideas, that framework is there. That's my take. I only want to thank you very much. And I also wish to apologize. Coming to air, you need at least some kind of experience. I want to say I may not have measured to the best, but this being my first time, I hope we shall be together some other time. I want to thank you. But even when someone says, you are tier. I'm not talking about my tier. It is an idea that was brought by government, and I'm seeing how we could exploit it. That's my idea. I thank you.
Say goodbye to our viewers.
Yeah, viewers, this is Kyendo Ahamed. Maybe I may not have been introduced in one way or the other, but Kyendo Ahamed, amongst the Buganda, we say Kyendo Chibi tekikaaya mazzi. Kyendo nga kibi. Amazzi tegayinza kukaawa. That's my name. I've been a teacher for a very long time. I've been a senior assistant secretary and the Minister of Local Government. I've really very many things. I'm a student of literature and communication. I want to think we shall communicate them more. I thank you, Dr. Juuko. I thank you, viewers.
Thank you very much. We cannot go beyond this, but what I want members to know, or viewers to know, is that knowledge is dialectical. Knowledge is not owned by an individual. Knowledge is just shared. And we, being born from different mothers and from different families and background, and historical background, we cannot think the same. Therefore, the reasons why we bring people of different ideas and different background and different knowledge is to bring you to that kind of unity, diversity, to have that ability to conceive or to perceive everything. I mean, to perceive, to receive what everyone says, and then you find out how you perceive that point. We very, very apologetic to the situation that we were unable to have Honorable Lukyamuzi. He would have added another flavor to this discussion. Unfortunately, we are caught up by other circumstances that were which made us unable to get grip of him as we tried to, have a grip on him. Unfortunately, we are unable, and this really brought up about our loss of his brilliant discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very, very paramount that we, the professionals in the diaspora, decided to come up with a consultative council, and that consultative council will convene soon as we try to communicate to you. But as usual, those that have not registered with us, please try to register by sending an email to ufcc@getunn.com. All your messages will be received as we try to establish a day when we shall have the first meeting convened, and then we discuss as much as we can. We cannot always go beyond this. I think the discussion has to go on, and I love the way our viewers are very, very active and try, to participate in this show as we try to bring you more of the people of knowledge that have experience in life as well as in the political spheres political spheres. And this will be continuous as we wait for the coming Sunday next week to bring you other people that can also add their voices to the voices that we bring over here. Don't forget that after this show, Prince Paul will be coming up with a very pertinent show that everybody cannot miss to listen to and to watch as well. I would not go beyond this, and I just want you to continue with the discussion on the media platforms that we have, as we always do, and continue to read, share, and also comment on the document, on all those messages, all the ideas that were brought in. And please, thank you very much. Don't go away. Continue with the discussion and tune in next time as we have the show This and That with the Prince Paul Chimbugwe in the next hour. Thank you very much. God bless you, and have a blessed day and a blessed night, as well as a new week. Bye-bye for now.